Okay, people, it's Monday night. I know you're all busy. Niall, I'm hearing music up here. Yeah. Clearly it hasn't worked.
It's the disco.
Yeah.
There's a jukebox in the corner, isn't it?
Yeah, get up the yard.
Get the ad in.
Yeah, but I'm the kind of guy. I'm the guy who doesn't mind talking over music, actually. But Niall's getting it sorted out. But it's lovely to see so many people here. That the room is packed. There's a couple of things going on. Number one, I'm launching my book, so it's available down in the shop. Miriam's running the shop. My book is on music management, kind of globally. So, hooray, it's out now. And I brought 10 copies in on the bus. And number two, it's the launch of a thing Niall and myself have been talking about for a while, which is the Irish Popular Music Archive. And tonight is a way to start the oral history part of that, which is to record the stories of people who we admire, people whose stories we think are an integral part of Ireland's culture. And sometimes I've got two cheeky buggers beside me.
Well, we're still alive.
Yeah. What was I thinking, that this would be a smooth production? No, but we were thinking, let's try and do a series, because there seems to be a demand for people to sit down on a Monday night and listen to the chats. So we thought, let's try and do this monthly. And how would we start it? And there was no question for Niall and myself that we would start with the Radiators. So we're absolutely delighted that that we get to turn down their music.
Didn't need those speakers anyway.
No. And there is a bus to the Ioneer Hospital that'll be leaving in about 5 minutes' time. But no, absolutely thrilled to have Pete and Steve here. They were our first choice of who would we like to be here to kind of celebrate the history of Ireland's popular music. So we've allocated, we're 2 minutes over time at the moment, and we'll make up on that. We're punks, so we run a tight ship. So Steve, like, the Radiators have a very unusual position in Irish music history, because everyone talks about punk, and it's almost like in 1976 there was a lightning flash and punks came out that hadn't existed before, but you are kind of a link between what was going on that was interesting, that was countercultural, that was happening in London. You had witnessed that. So what was your life like as a music fan before the Radiators?
Well, I was a music fan since the 50s. I was born in 1950, so I was, became of age when, say, the Beatles and the Stones and all those bands came about, and I began to investigate deeper. So I began to listen to people like Pretty Things, the Yardbirds, the more interesting for me bands were there. But for our road to where we came with punk, I suppose what happened was I did guitar lessons and realised there was no way I could play an instrument. So what could I do that was bringing me closer to music? So for a time I did light shows. I did liquid light shows with various bands, and worked with Roger Doyle and people like that, Supply, Demand and Curve, doing these big light shows. And then I suppose I kind of thought, well, maybe I could manage a band, maybe I could do something that would bring me even closer to that. And I decided, well, the best thing to do is, like, if you want to play football and you own the ball, you can pick the team. So I said, I'll try and see if I spot people. I was working at this stage in the Golden Disc in Liffey Street, and I said, look, let me see who comes into the shop, and if I think somebody fits my profile of who I would like to be in a band with, I'll ask them. So I watched very carefully as people came in the shop and said what records they were looking at, what list they were listening to, you know. And that's how I came across Pete. I saw Pete going through a rack and saying he's so I went over to him and just said to him, hey, do you want to be in the band? And he said, yeah, maybe. And that's how I got Billy Morley. Billy Morley came in as well and did the same thing. And so I had no idea whether Pete could, or Billy could play. That was not the important thing. These guys looked right. And that was more important to me than whether they could play or not.
The fact that I was carrying the guitar was a little bit unclear.
Golf clubs are going away. Anyway, that's how we got going. But the thing that I suppose to sort of realise is that our road to punk wasn't on our radar when we started out at all. We were trying to put together some music that echoed our heroes, people like the MC5, the New York Dolls, the Velvet Underground. These were the people that we really admired.
So it was actually 1972 when I walked into that shop. So like we're talking, 4 or 5 years before the punk, And I had just arrived back from London. I was born in Dublin, and I had arrived back in Dublin after spending the entire 1960s in London, which was fantastic. It was amazing. And arriving back in Dublin for me was like going back in time to the 1950s, And it was clearly evidence that the country needed a cultural revolution, a post-De Valera kick into the 21st century, So Steve was really aware of that and was basically wanting to mastermind the music side of it, for sure.
Okay, and you mentioned, Steve, the Velvet Underground. Ireland wasn't well served by records. Like, there was no rep going around with boxes of Velvet Underground records to go and this. How did the Velvet Underground get to Ireland? Because there's a great story there.
Yeah, well, my dad was an airline pilot and was flying to New York on a regular basis. So when I worked in Golden Disc in Liffey Street, one of the things they asked me to do was do the ordering. So I was there every Saturday. I wasn't a full-time employee, just there every Saturday. So people would come in to me and say, well, what have you got? What kind of list? Who do you recommend this week? And I would say the Velvet Underground, and I'd have my own copy there. And you want a copy, we'll get it for you next week or whatever. And so a lot of albums like that came in before they were released. In fact, one of the biggest sellers we ever had was the Monkees, because believe it or not, the Monkees albums, even though the TV series was on RTE, or you could watch it in Ireland, records weren't available. So we started to import copies of those. So he'd bring 5 or 6 copies at a time back. So that's where I got to hear a lot of those kind of bands in the early days. I mean, the funny stories that I've told you before is I would send my dad off on the most peculiar missions. I'd say, there's a place in New York called The Factory where Andy Warhol works. Would you go down there and get me a copy of Interview magazine with the New York Dolls on the cover? And apparently he did. He went down to this really strange place in his full Aer Lingus captain's uniform, which they obviously thought was something very trendy, and got me a copy of the Interview magazine with the New York Dolls on the cover. But it was a great, you could get these records that nobody had ever heard of at the time. So, and I was always very investigative about the music. As I say, people like The Creation from The Who, people like, these are more obscure bands that I began to listen to. But my awakening to what you might call became punk was bands like the Deviants. I went to see the Deviants playing Trafalgar Square, and I saw them. Mick Farron I met and talked to, and he was kind of very, inspiring, because this was a band that were playing. He wasn't a great singer, they weren't a great musical band, but they inspired me because they were doing it, they were there, and they were exciting, and which is more important than how well they could play. So with bands like that, Pink Fairies, Earth, Wind, that was my road. Music that was rocking but had a political, social activist side to it as well.
And you spot Pete, he's going through the record racks, he looks cool. Pete, did Steve look cool back then, or was it the only gig you were offered?
I think my first impression was, who's this fucking weirdo? That's my first impression.
Continuing impression.
Well, I remember exactly what it looked like, because unfortunately I don't have it anymore. But the man on the bridge took a picture of me with my Mr. Freedom clothes, and I'll tell you what it looked like. You ever see In the Name of the Father, when Daniel Day-Lewis comes back from London with the Afghan coat? That's fucking exactly what I look like. Now, in Dublin, that you look like a complete alien. Do you know what I mean? And you know, I was a glam rocker that had been dumped into the middle of Dublin in 1972, where I found out many years later that why Slade were much more popular than T-Rex in Ireland, which I could never fathom. I couldn't fathom that. You know, a bunch of fellas from Birmingham or wherever they were from, you know, they're just not as cool as T-Rex, and it's because T-Rex were perceived as being more effeminate. Do you know what I mean? So I looked exactly like Mark Bowler, you know? And I'm in the middle of Dublin, and I go to a local disco, where the discos in Dublin were often frequented by the lads up from the country. And I started sitting there looking like Mark Bolan glam rocker, and some poor fella came up to me and asked me to dance. And I was identifying as male in those days, and when I said, "I'm a fucking bloke," he actually turned white, and I think he ran all the way back to Galway. but it was evident to me that you know, I did actually stay in Ireland. I said, this is just too backward for me. I'm going back to London, you know. And thankfully I had met Steve, and Steve was in a band at the time, believe it or not, in 1972. Steve will tell you about this gig now. They were called Bent Theory and the Punks, and they did a gig in a school hall, and they were very much like a Stooges type thing, you know. So that was my first time seeing Steve as a performer, before I went back to London.
Yeah, quickly.
No, but that's very important, because you know what you brought to the scene that became known as the punk scene. You know, you mentioned you were a glam rocker. You still are. Like, you know,
sure,
that's in the beating heart of everything that I hear from you. And Steve, you were finding this social agitation music from Britain, from the States, that was way out of line with what was happening culturally in Ireland.
Completely, yeah.
So,
yeah.
like, what was the look back then? What was the scene? You know, you've spoken a bit about horse slips before. Like, who were the people in Dublin or anywhere in Ireland who you thought, they're kind of cool, I'll keep an eye on them? Or did you feel very isolated?
Yeah, kind of isolated. For me anyway, any band that came to Ireland and played the National Stadium, I went to see, even bands that I saw, yes, who I don't particularly like, but I wanted to see professional English bands and see how they presented themselves. I saw a lot of interesting bands at that time. I had no concept of performing myself. That became, as we began to get into what we were doing, the realization that there was a kind of performance art mode to this. And as Pete said, when Philip joined, we all had this, we loved high energy rock and roll. In fact, I think our first interview, we called ourselves Suburban High Energy Rock and Roll Band. And that's what we were, white suburban high energy rock and roll band. And that's what we were trying to get across, this 3-minute back to the roots of 50s rock and roll. That's really, and it's been our aim ever since, basically, to kind of follow that through, to play music that really we sort of felt excited to play.
So I kept in touch with Steve by letter. You know,
Yeah.
We used to write. I don't know if I still. I'd love to have those still. Yeah, but we used to write to each other, keep it, you know, old-fashioned
Yeah.
writing letters. So I came back then in 1975. In the meantime, I had worked for a transatlantic records group. So I actually worked in the music industry, etc., which was a dream. And then, so it was really in 1975 when I came back. We then said, right, Steve, let's try and put something together. I mean, the word punk wasn't even mentioned. It was, as Steve said, it was this, you know, we knew what we wanted. We wanted to make a noise, you know, make a loud noise and shout and scream, and you know, kick this country into the 21st century. You know, where it needed to be. I think. You know?
I think one of the first things that we worked together on was the song "Love Detective," which was inspired by the New York Dolls. To me, you know, it was kind of like a way, and it's quite funny because we were having a conversation earlier about trying to fit something into a song, and because I'm not musical, I wrote lines that didn't fit the scan of the song, and people would say, "How are you going to fit that in the song?" Just let me try and do that. And did it.
The word that Steve managed to fit in to a line of a song was eliminating the impossible. It's pure genius. I was a motto around there too, eliminating the impossible.
And the rest is true.
So when he did that in the studio, I just remember going, this guy's an actually. Well, see with Steve, when you're working with Steve's a visual person, right? He's a visual person. So if I try to explain something to him as a producer, you know, in musical terms, it just, you know, it's just does not compute. So for example, if I go to the lyric sheet, so see that word there, you're coming in a bit too soon. So I point an arrow going that way. And then the next one, I point an arrow here, there, arrow. Next take, perfect. Once you got those, but I know like Steve's input cannot be into the creation of not just the Radiators, but into the creation of a music scene cannot be sort of underestimated. You know, it was his vision. You know, he almost like a guru in sort of sense, certainly introduced us to all these weird and wonderful bands that in many cases we'd never really heard of, you know, and thankfully we used that then as the influence. You know, when we started to begin to want to write our own songs like Love Detective, we knew roughly where our starting point was. We knew what we didn't want to do, and now we had to find out what we did actually want to do. You know? And that was just to keep it real, keep it loud. Definitely not new though, you know, but just full of energy and drop it into this Dublin scene and see what happened. You know? And we were literally like as if we had landed from outer space, you know, which was brilliant. It was great. You know?
I mean, there's that story which, to me, was the first time I realised the power of what we could possibly do. We were rehearsing in Malahide in the garage, and we got a call from a promoter that Philip had chased up to say, well, look, there's a gig on in the Asgard in Howth, and the band that was supposed to be playing can't make it. Can you guys fill in? So we went over to the Asgard that evening in full punk. You know, I had got red wallpaper down the side with a lightning bolt symbol all the way down the hall. We were wearing, you know, the full gear. We went on, and I think the band that was supposed to be playing was probably more in tune with the Eagles than it was with us. By the third song, the entire audience had walked out. And we thought, wow, this is doing. And the one behind the bar says, "It's okay, we'll pay you. You don't have to play." So no, you might be joking. It's a full PA here. Carry on, boys. So we did our full.
We had an intermission and then came out and did the set. we actually got paid. I think we got paid 17 points for that.
Yeah. And the place was burnt down shortly afterwards. So that's never let them back again.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Let's go back to two of those points. Pete, you mentioned Steve is a visual guy, you know, more than a trained scholar of music. Fanzines were incredibly important in Ireland, and we were very, very lucky. You know, obviously Heat is well known, Vox is very well known, but Raw Power was there, Nuclear Days, Niall's fanzines. But you were doing fanzines before punk, so what was your thought process, or what were you hoping to do, or what inspired you? I came across an article in some English newspaper saying, I came to Dublin to review Horselips, and I met this guy who's doing a fanzine.
Yeah.
And that guy was you.
Yeah. It was cheap printing. You know, we didn't have photocopiers in the same way, but I used to do a fanzine called Freak, which was essentially a piece of paper that was folded up into a tiny little fanzine. So you'd get it printed on each side, and then you just sit there all day long folding into small things and sell them. We used to sell them outside the National Stadium. And people say, is that a program? Oh yeah, it's a program, yeah. So they bought them all. So we would sell them all, you know, and one of the first ones I did was on Horselips. And I did one that was essentially about Hawkwind at one time. Which one of my proud moments is when I met the guys who managed Hawkwind, they said, oh, by the way, Barney thinks this is great. That's Barney Bubbles, who was my ultimate hero as a designer, you know. So that to me was great to do it. But it was just trying to expose people to the kind of music that I'd like people to listen to, or they should be aware of, and that was really what it was about. And then there was a gap, and then photocopiers came in, and we did raw power, you know, basically as a promotion for ourselves, because nobody else was going to write about us.
No, absolutely, and it does sound funny, especially to young people, that you found your own media because no one would write about you, but it was a very exclusionary society at that time. So you didn't wait around for spotlight to put you on the cover.
No.
But the Radiators, like, how did that form? Like, how did it go from more than an idea and looking for cool people, looking for people who might be up for doing something that would shake the system up?
Well, there was a full band prior to that. We had a guy called Joey Clark, who was a drummer who played drums with us, and a guy called Dave McAdam, who played bass. So there was Pete, myself, Billy, and these two guys. Then Billy, after a while, got fed up that we weren't getting anywhere, getting gigs or whatever, so he decided he wanted to pull back from it. So we advertised through Faulkner O'Kelly in the evening press for another musician, and various people responded, and Pete and I would go and meet somebody, and we would talk and kind of explain what we were talking to, and the guy would come out the following week to rehearsals and then say, "Can we play a Deep Purple song?" And you say, "Well, no, you can't. Can you leave?" We met Philip Chevron through that, and Philip put it out one day in his Honda 50, this very strange looking guy with a big helmet and a gold tooth, and he played us 2 songs, and both Pete and I knew this guy was, you know, exceptionally good. The lyrics were Tin Can Alley Cats was one of the songs he played us.
That became Blitz and Ritz.
Blitz and Ritz, yeah. And it sort of, so Philip we thought was great, but in the truth, I said to Philip, look, I'm looking for a lead guitar player, and you're a rhythm guitar player and a songwriter, and with Pete I have a rhythm guitar and a songwriter. So I said, thank you very much. But then this is a guy who'd gone to London and seen the Sex Pistols and David Bowie at Wembley in the same week. So I rang him up and said, look, this is crazy. You're the right person for the band. Would you have a go playing lead guitar? So he said, yeah, I'll try it. Now, Philip playing lead guitar was very exciting because it could be appallingly bad or it could be great. And the ironic thing is
you had Dave Davies of the Kinks. He was exactly like that. He could be fucking brilliant or group.
Yeah.
They were both, whatever, it was just made this noise, that was great.
But then suddenly the ironic thing is that Pete became lead guitar player and Philip became rhythm player. But that was what we were finding as the band developed. As you say, we got Philip then, we just the 3 of us for a while. And then Philip said, look, I know this guy called Jimmy Crash, who's he's a drummer. So he came, and then Mark worked in this place where Philip was working in his father's architect office. And he said, this guy's a funky rhythm guitar player. So I got in touch with Mark and said, would you play bass? And that was the foundation of what we became, because Mark was the best musician in the band, and had a sense of melody. So his bass playing was essentially the lead basis of what we were doing. His lines on the bass were what we structured the songs around.
So the chemistry of the band, the Radiators, the final sort of lineup, was the fact that Jimmy Crash's father was a trumpet player, jazz trumpet player. So Jimmy would have been influenced by jazz music. So his sort of drumming style would have been led by jazzy type thing. Mark Negre, God bless him, was very much into black music. So that came through on his bass lines. And then I was very much into glam rock and roll and rockabilly. And Philip was also into glam rock, but then he was also into the musicals, the Sound of Music or whatever you have in yourself, etc. And theatre, of course. And then sort of Steve had this sort of had the ability to pull all those elements together. And Steve always contributed musically. You could never underplay what he contributed actually musically. Plays a mean tambourine, etc. and so on. But Steve just gave it that element that was you couldn't categorise in any way, which is good. I think it's great. He still does it for the Pilgrims. He's that element in the Pilgrims that nobody else has. And when it's integrated with what the rest of us are doing, it gives it that something different, which is critically important. So I think that if you were to listen very closely and study the musicality of the Radiators, even in TV Tube Park in particular, but that's all there, and that's what I think with all bands is those different musical influences that gave it its unique sound, you know.
One,
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Steve, go
No,
on.
one of my fine memories was we were in the studio recording, and we decided nobody put singles on an album at the time. So we decided we'd do a new version of Television Screen when we went in to do the album. And we knew that the introduction was basically Nut Rocker by Bill Bumble and the Stingers. So I said to Mark, would you play a piano on the beginning with a So I brought in a tiny little kid's piano, and seeing Mark in the darkened studio lying down on his hands and knees going to do it was, you know, it was what we were about. We were all worked together. There wasn't a leader as such.
And it was in Lombard Studios that we went. I mean, TV Jukebox. We did the Television Screen single in just a few
Trend.
hours in
Yeah.
Trend Studios, and we managed to sort of blow a fuse for the studio, which was an absolute triumph. We did find that most engineers said, you know, I think a few of them sort of walked out and said, this isn't music and that type of thing. That was great.
Yeah.
That was another positive tip. But when we went into Lombard, when Philippe Chevron saw Tubular Bells, a complete set of Tubular Bells, right? Punk or not, he said, that's going on the album. That's going on the album. So if you listen to the start of Sunday Well, ding, 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 that's where the Tubular Bells are. Isn't it?
Fantastic.
And that's just the way, you know, I think, you know, we were always going to, I think, you know, you have to be creative in a different way in the studio than to live. Live, you know, playing live is a transient moment, and when it happens, etc. But very, very early on, we realised that, you know, when we're getting into record stuff, this is going to be forever. You know, those moments will be captured forever. And I do remember, and there was a period where I found it very difficult to even listen to TV Jukebox after we'd gone through, say, Ghost Town, Tony Visconti, and what we learned there. But then I got beyond that, and I said, no, it actually captures the band as we were at that very moment in time, the same way as the Beatles' first albums, or the Stones, or whoever you have yourself. So for me, you can't really compare it to Ghost Town. But I think it's equally, if not even more important to Irish culture than Ghost Town is, personally speaking.
Right. And you know, things get put in boxes when we look behind. So punk has been put in a box, and it's as if there was nothing before, and then it ended, and there was ska or two-tone or pop. But what you weren't just creating at that time, you were witnessing it. What about punk inspired you, or you thought, I'm so glad to be alive, to be a contemporary of these people? So what inspired you from punk, and then what did you do with that signal to yourself?
Well, for me, it became quite apparent, particularly when we went to London, you know, and we realised that we were, you know, initially in the peripheral of you know, a major subculture, you know? And what you realised was that punk and what it stood for was open to everybody and anybody. You know, you had, as I say, like you had said it many times, like you had tall punks, short punks, skinny punks, fat punks, spotty punks, you know, smelly punks, and all the ones that were bullied for those attributes at school were now they were just a punk, you know, and they were accepted into this group of individuals, and that's such a critical part of growing up, you know, and being part of a culture like that. So being a musician, and from that perspective, you found yourself, you know, like Tom Robertson, like where you were like a social worker, you know, and you certainly would be, you know, kids coming up to you that wanted to talk to you and want to talk to you about their issues and how this is helping them, that's helping, etc., and so on and so forth. So it was a brilliant movement. You know, it still is a brilliant movement. That's the way. It never went away. It didn't go anywhere. You know? It's just that the mainstream media. I think, you know, as we know the way things are going at the moment, you know, with the right wing governments, etc. You know, there's obviously a need for punks of all ages to get back together and start shouting again.
I mean,
Fuck you, fuck
yeah.
you and your policies.
Well, it encapsulated an
and
attitude.
take the consequences
Yeah,
for it.
yeah.
Go to America and say, get your fucking act together, I'm prepared to do it.
Yeah, it encapsulated an attitude which I don't
Yeah, I
think
think
we've ever lost. We still, but by the same token, you look at TV Chip Art and the next album, Ghost Town, there's a huge leap forward. We weren't going to stand still and be a cartoon appreciation of that music. We wanted to keep moving forward. I mean, I always thought one of the most punk bands I ever listened to was Cabaret Voltaire and Nag Nag Nag. I mean, here you are making a load of noise with an instrument you don't even have to learn to play. You just sort of use a machine to do it, and that's what inspired me to do my next. Moved on from the Radiators to do something with electronic music, because it just I wanted to make music, but I hadn't got the ability to sit down and play it in a straight fashion. But all through the entire, I mean, the strangest thing was during the making of TV Tube Heart, I came to Pete and Philip and I said, I'm going to leave the band, and everybody was kind of shocked. I said, I realise now, listening to what you're doing, that you need a singer that's going to be able to sing these songs rather than a performer on the song.
So Steve basically dropped me right in it. I said, well, if you're not going to sing on the outside, I had to do my best impersonation of Steve on a few of the tracks. You know what I mean? Where I hadn't sort of really found my own voice. I had to find my own voice really on Ghost Town.
And it's kind of weird in a way when the 40th anniversary of TV Show Heart came out, Pete said, oh, there's some tracks here that we found that you're singing on them, the lead singing. And when I listened for the first time in 40 years, I realised they're not as bad as I thought they were. That I could do it. Because I mean, people forget that for the early gigs, I was up front singing pretty well everything, and Philip and Pete were there. But that's what made it for me. Pete and Philip were there all the time, vocally with me. It wasn't like one guy and nothing else. This was a band firing on all five cylinders.
So you have to remember, when we started doing gigs, obviously we had the Brimstown Rats doing their R&B set, right? And, but both bands were suddenly playing high energy music to a new, younger, fresh audience. Do you know what I mean? And it was critical. Anyway, but I mean, some of the early gigs in Moran's Hotel, for example, Smiley Bulge used to run gigs down there, and it was like a battleground almost, where they'd be quite just as happy to throw a pint of beer at you as sort of worship you. And I do actually remember the things you see from in the crowd. I remember one guy sort of close to the front row who had sort of fuzzy hair and sort of black brown corduroy jacket, and he was trying to work out what the fuck is this. He was just trying to work it out. And Steve's sort of running around like a madman, with his cap sleeve t-shirt, and then this fellow with a big silver tooth, and then this gorgeous sort of Elvis Presley lookalike and etc. and so on. And he just got his beer and he poured it over his head. I said, "What that do?" He did something. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. I remember. Sorry, Steve. There was a gig down the country when we had come back to do a tour. We suddenly started doing gigs down in the ballrooms that were vacated by the show bands. So suddenly there was a punk band going down, and the ballroom manager looking for us to play like a 2 or 3 hour set. We said, what? I said, we play 45 minutes, but we do about 27 songs. and we did this gig. We did this gig in a ballroom. It was, let's say, sparsely attended, but we were on a guarantee at this stage, And it was like that scene from Back to the Future, when he goes mad on the guitar and everyone's sort of just looking, and he finishes and it's like a. It's like the whole gig was like that. The whole gig was like that. And then we finished. We went out to the bar, and these kids started coming up and saying, "That was fucking brilliant. We'd never seen anything like that before." We said, "Well, why didn't you do something?" I said, well, what do you do to that music? I said, well, you know, you get a dog collar and a short chain, you put that around your girlfriend's neck as well, and you hop up and down like a pogo stick and you spit at the band. It's a great idea. But of course we weren't going back there. I think the next band did were the Horse Lips. So, hoping they were showered in fucking vomit. So it was. So we did realise that we were, and I said this before, and Steve would agree. We were like a bit like musical missionaries, right? Bringing a brand of music to the country folk.
As Pete was saying, we did this one gig down the country where we played the 40-minute set, and the guy came and says, "You've got to do another 40 minutes at least," you know. So we didn't know what to do. So we did the longest version of Paranoid that anybody's ever, 20 minutes long. Of us just me saying,
to get paid, yeah?
Finish with my woman and then with my Paranoid, you know. And then they all danced, whereas before they just looked at us and they all danced for 20 minutes. So, you know, you got away with what you could. We played a gig that Horse was playing in a marquee down the country, and we were with show bands, each side of us, and then this Ireland's punk band. And we were on stage.
There was he said Ireland's first punk band, I think it said, on the poster. I think someone sort of crossed it at only or something.
We
played the light shows thing.
Yeah.
There was a big red bulb.
Yeah, we said it.
A
Where's the
red
lighting?
bulb above the stage. That was the light show.
Yeah, he said, "Where's the light?" That's it. He puts a red bulb in the west side of the window. But we were in the midst. We started the set. We were 20 minutes into the set, and we were doing a full-on thing. A lot of young kids in the market. When a guy came up, put his hand up, and said, "Stop." And we said, "What's going on?" He said, "Go to the bingo now." And the raffle. And he came out and this is one of the most surrealistic images I ever remember. 4 nuns came on stage, trays of sandwiches and tea for us.
In the middle of our set. Yeah.
While they called out the raffle number. It only happened in Ireland.
But the weird thing was, strangely enough, it was where this would be at a stage now where there was an acceptability of punk music, or you know, it's just these kids making a lot of noise for the youngsters. You know, that's the way that the priests and the nuns saw it, which was great.
And you know, for anyone who hasn't bought the last CD, the Live at Hawkins House, it's a brilliant album, but it's worth buying for the sleeve notes by Joe Mooney alone. That you know puts the band in context. But you know, when you look back at your career, because this weird thing called punk, as you said, it keeps going, and you know we've got I would say great representatives from that tribe now. But like, what were you trying to do with the first album? Like, what when you look back at that and think, when you were making that, like, what were you trying to say that maybe isn't just in the lyrics or in the sound?
Well, with TB Tube Heart, the reality was that we had a fatality at one of our gigs. I don't really want to go too much into that, right? But it was something that happened. It was very, very unfortunate. We organised the first punk festival in Dublin, and unfortunately there was a stabbing at the gig and someone died of it. And we had to face the consequence of that. You know, there was a lot of things we thought, like we thought, you know, we thought of maybe, you know, this is it, let's, you know, let's get out of this, etc. and so on. But no, when in the end, it was just an unfortunate event that happened on a Saturday night in a ballroom, and it happens every Saturday night in all ballrooms everywhere, you know. But that sort of fed then into this media backlash. We were on the verge of we had a lot of interest from the UK, you know, and Rick Rogers and Chiswick really begins to sort of introduce the band slowly, and then sort of this happened. So the fatality ended up splashed across the cover of the NME in an almost like a tabloid way, which I'll never forgive him for saying it, but Bob Geldof did say it's the best thing that ever happened to them, you know, and it wasn't, you know, it certainly wasn't. However, you know, I think we wrote a letter, a strongly worded letter to the enemy, calling them every name under the sun and saying, you know, etc. While other journalists reported on the event and in a different way, etc. So that sort of fed into our psyche, and that's why it's called TV Tube Heart, and that's why all the songs are about the media and how the media can fuck things up for everybody, and it's almost like ahead of its time that way. What is true? What is true? What you see and what you read and what you hear. What is actually true and what is fabricated? You know what I mean? So we want to be ahead of them, basically. So that sort of fed into songs like Sunday World, etc., and so on. And Enemies, NME, you hear at the very end, as etc. and so on. So that, unfortunately, that fatality fed into what we were doing, but we try to make it a positive thing as opposed to a negative thing. We've always accepted the fact that someone lost their life.
Well, we didn't play for quite a long while of that. We kind of did meet and did talk about, should we break up? Should we just, what gig is worth somebody's life? What we realised that we had nothing to do with it happened way before we were on stage, and it became we couldn't get a booking anywhere. And Roger said, "Look, let's go ahead and record the album." So it came forward.
Actually, you're right. That was one of the consequences, that we end up maybe recording the album maybe a little bit earlier than we were really ready for it. You know what I mean? We just got on with it at the end.
Yeah, we just took the opportunity and did it. And the strange thing was we were working. All of us were kind of working. I was going to work and going to the studio in the evening, staying up all night, and going straight to work the next day. So 3 days of kind of like completely buzzed out. But we managed to record.
Yeah, the legacy of the Radiators for someone like me was life changing. It changed my life at the time, but it's continued to reverberate. And now I get to enjoy one of my favourite bands anywhere with the Troubled Pilgrims. Is there part of the Radiators still in you, like that fire, or have you parked that? And what's the relationship for you between the Pilgrims and also with the glam rock stuff that you've got coming out there? Where are you now, and how has the past influenced you?
Well, it's in the Radiators' DNA is part of what the Troubled Pilgrims are. There's 3 members of the band that were Radiators in the past, and we'll continue to. We always think sometimes when we're writing something, what would Philip think it is? Would Philip approve of what we're doing? And I think his spirit is with us all the way through. And if you look back at what the early Radiators influences were, those influences are resurfacing. We're still interested in making short, sharp rock and roll songs. That's really what we're trying to do with the band at the moment. With a city guy at the end playing the theremin to kind of like add the weirdness to the whole thing. But that's really what
I think one of the best compliments I ever had for the Radiators, for Troubled Pilgrims, was the people that heard the music but hadn't seen the band felt it was a much younger band that they were listening to, which I thought was great. Which is, it's sort of, we may have aged, but our spirit hasn't. I think our spirit we've retained that spirit of giving a voice, and the greatest thing punk did, and most subcultures did, they give a voice to those that maybe don't have a voice, and stand up for your rights. You got to fight, fight, fight. I've sung a new album, which was recorded during Biden's administration, and I thought, fight, fight, fight for a better. And of course, a man came along after the fake assassination attempt. So I just thought, you know what? I'm going to release that and sing it in America, and I hope all the maggers buy it and make me ultra rich. And now I just go, fuck the lot of you.
And final note, plug your new product, please.
I recorded an album called Electric Jukebox Volume 1, and it's basically the album I've always wanted to record on my own, which is I've always thought that there was obviously a direct connection between the energy of punk and the energy of glam rock, and the only difference between the two is really across all the art forms, depending on the social conditions, glam rock emerged at a time of economic recession in, you know, the oil crisis of the early 70s. So the function of glam rock and the glam rock music, it was fantasy world, and it was something to take you away from all the shit that you had to go through from Monday to Friday, right? And then you go through another phase then of realism, you know, Charles Dickens and punk. Punk was realism, you know, like this is the world as it is, you know? And I think that, you know, I'm just trying to combine those two energies, and I think that we're going into, I, you know, personally, you know, I think we're almost like going into there being a need for a little bit of music just to bring you somewhere at the weekend, where take you away from all this shit. Like On The Jukebox in the corner. That's really what it's about.
Pete and Steve, thank you so much. Give it up for